that joined the first and or second Power Hour, welcome back. For those that are fresh to this, welcome. We had some great feedback from the first two webinars, and it's amazing to have so many of you with us today to potentially dig a bit deeper into something different. The idea behind the Power Hour sessions was really born out of a strange enjoyment for risk, combined with a determination to showcase exactly how good the Power Platform, albeit previously Power Apps, can be. And we are, as it says on the tin, focusing today on Power Automate with our resident wizard, Alex Jones. On that, some quick introductions from the team here today before we kick off. My name is Tom Moore. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Power 365 Solutions, which is an organization set up to deliberately take advantage of Microsoft's Power Platform and business process automation in general. We have a fantastic hand-picked team that is ever growing. Watch this space specifically on that point for sure. And our primary focus is really turning our clients' business problems into automated solutions and essentially trying to capitalize on the license cost that you're all paying for Microsoft 365. My background is technically modern workplace, but my passion has always been finding and somehow fixing problems. And Canvas apps, or Power Apps specifically for me, have given me the perfect playground to do so. So I will hand over to Alex for the remainder of this session, being aware that he only has an hour to show us some magic. So, Mr. Jones, take it away.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Power Hour once again. Away, as Tom said, that some of you may have not been here before, but thanks for joining us on this gorgeous summer's day. With that, if you can take this outside, and please do so. If you hear some road noise in the background, apologies, but that's saving me from closing the window and potentially passing out. So just bear with me a little bit if you can hear some road noise. Just a quick introduction from myself then. I'm the head of the Power Platform and Dynamics here at P365. I've been professionally operating within the space for 3 to 4 years, but I've been in the consultancy space for well over 7 to 8 years, especially around Microsoft technologies. We've all kind of come from an RAF background, so I was very much a SharePoint consultant in the RAF, and then I've obviously found the magic of the Power Platform, which we're going to be talking about today. As Tom's just alluded to as well, he's covered some previous sessions. They were running around the basic concepts around Canvas apps, taking a concept on the call and turning it into a kind of solution. And then the second one was also building that solution. So today, the session's focus is going to be around Power Automate. Through popular demand, the focus is going to be around Power Automate and data-first deployments. Bear with me, I've got sticky fingers and it's very hot outside, so I might be a little bit slow in typing. But the quick scope of today, what we were looking at is some best practices, hints and tips, useful functions, and kind of a fictitious real world use case as we go through. So I'm going to try and use this in real world scenarios, but obviously it's not a real world scenario. I've built a little custom page that does some little wizzy things, and hopefully you can get a flavor of what it would look like in the real world. So we'll also be following up with you to provide the recording, and the intention is to kind of drip feed these hints and tips out as blog posts over the coming weeks. So with that, please follow myself and Power 365 Solutions on LinkedIn to ensure that you just don't miss out anything. As Tom's already said, we are pretty tight on a time schedule and we've got a lot to get through, so I won't be able to stop for questions throughout, but I do have a trusty team of P365 employees on hand to answer any questions that you may have in the chat. And I'm sure, looking at the scope of the people who's joined on LinkedIn, that there's plenty of people on this call who have vast amount of experience in Power Automate. So please, if you're one of those people, feel free to answer any questions or share your experiences throughout. As there's so much to go through, I'm just going to keep on going until my time's up. So I'm just going to kindly ask Tom to prompt me and interject when there's 10 minutes left, just so I can speed up a little bit and hopefully get through everything that we need to. But I'm going to try and get a nice balance of showing you some demos and some Blue Peter, here's one I made earlier, kind of scenarios. As I've already said, we're going to be covering some best practices, but it is worth noting that these are our internal best practices and stuff that we've learned along the years. Obviously, there's many ways which you can achieve similar outcomes within the Power Platform. That's what makes it so brilliant, but everyone does have their own kind of standardized process. So this may differ from what you already understand, but please feel free to share your experiences if you've got a different opinion. That's what this is for. It's an open forum for everyone to kind of learn and develop their own personal journeys. But it's also great for us if we get some feedback from others on how you potentially implement things as well. So without further ado, what I'll do is we'll get straight into it and I'll share my screen. Just a little verbal confirmation from Tom there. You can see that, Tom.
Good to go.
Perfect. So we'll get to it. Hopefully you have an understanding of Power Automate. So I've scoped this session primarily based off the attendees that were registered through LinkedIn. So there seems to be quite a lot of technical people who's attending this event. So we're going to be brushing over some of the basics just so everyone can get the most out of the call. If you don't have a great understanding of Power Automate at this point, please do stick with me. I can guarantee that you'll learn something useful from this call at some point. So Power Automate, what have we got? Power Automate is the go-to application for automation that Microsoft have to offer. And in my opinion, it's the best tool on the market, and it's the best tool Microsoft have to offer. There's multiple facets to what you can do with Power Automate. We're going to be brushing over just some of them, as I said, with a primary focus around Dataverse deployments, because that's something that's really talked about from my experience joining webinars and some calls in the past. It tends to be an area that's just brushed upon and then passed over to another technology like SharePoint, etc. So we'll kind of keep it a primary focus around Dataverse, but again, a lot of this is applicable to Power Automate in general. So a lot of the functions you'll see are transferable. So this is the screen it takes you to. Many of you must be familiar with it. This is when you click the little waffle application, then press Power Automate. It takes you straight away to some templates, which are fantastic. And it also takes you to some learning material and then also more to explore with Power Automate. But if we was going to start building a Power Automate flow, the natural progression would be to just select My Flows. And then from your My Flows area, you can see all the cloud flows that you've personally created, your desktop flows, business process flows, and your shared with me. So in this instance, what we could do is we could go and just create a flow. We could choose to create one from a template. Some examples you've just seen already on the screen. Visio template, automated, instant, scheduled, desktop, and business process flow. So unfortunately, in this session, it's kind of out of scope to go into the kind of AI elements and desktop automation. That's potentially something we look to explore in the future if there's appetite for it. So if you feel there is, please do fire some comments in the chat, and then we'll see what we can do in future sessions. But because we're going to be primarily focusing on Dataverse deployments, it's only apt that we go to the solutions area and we do it properly from the off. So I'm kind of in my P365 solutions environment. We'll go to our solutions. And just to give you a little bit of an overview for how we structure things as best practices, we do horizontal solution layering. So that's how we like to split our components out into individual solutions. As you can see here, we've got all the way down from web resources, option sets, tables, security roles, etc., all the way up the chain. And then the final two, which we're primarily going to be focusing on today, are your connection references and your flows environment variables. Again, custom connectors is something I'd love to dip into, and it's definitely going to be a session for the future because there's a whole host of things that we can cover, potentially look at some Azure Logic apps, etc., in that as well. But for today, what we're going to look at is just standard flows, flows, environment variables, connection references, and everything in between. Some little best practices and hints and tips, which I've personally been through a lot of pain trying to get. So this is all my experience and all my hardship over the years, learning some harsh lessons. I'm hopefully going to save you from learning those lessons as well. So without further ado, what we'll look at is the connection references to start. So I'll always recommend that you create named connection references. And that's just because it's cleaner, it's easier to associate to flows, and they can automatically pick up. Now, these connection references can be owned by different accounts. So I could create one and then put it and log in the context of a service account, which I'll always do. So if we look at the connection references, I've already done this. As I've said, a lot of this is kind of pre-made in these sessions, just so you can get the ultimate benefit out of it. But there will be some demos as well of some kind of live builds that we'll put in place as well. So as you can see, I've created 3 connection references from the off. So I've got the prefix of the Power Hour service account, which is the account that I will be authorizing it with. I haven't done that in that scenario, but again, this is fictitious. I would do it. So we've got the Power Hour service account and then the connection name. So gone are the days, recent days actually, where it was in preview and you could only have 16 flows associated to the connection reference. Now it's out of preview. You can have as many as you want. There's certain limitations, obviously, around API limits and kind of what your licensing agreement is for your service account. If you are hitting those limits and you're on enterprise licenses, then you're doing something wrong. There's probably need to restrict the API calls that you're making. But you can obviously create multiple connection references. These can then be deployed upstream. We recommend deploying these unmanaged throughout. So it's the kind of only solution that we recommend deploying unmanaged. The rest of the solutions, as you've seen there in the horizontal splitting, would go in as managed. That's just so you can manage these at any time and kind of change the connections. It's quite common that you'd have a kind of a dev account, and then you'd have a UAT account, then potentially a pre-prod and a prod, etc., for different service accounts. So how to create a connection reference, pretty straightforward. The name connection reference, go new, more, connection reference. They've dramatically improved how this operates and how it looks, but when you search for connector, it's still not that intuitive, unfortunately. But what you would do is you typically just name it. So we've got the Power Hour, and we put in again, we put in the service account. We'll put that in there, and then we'll say that this is again Dataverse 2 because we're running over some limits. Add a description in there. It can be nice and brief, so you can say connection reference power. Please also bear with me, multitasking's not up there on my list of good qualities. So then we choose a connector. So in this instance, I know that this is going to be the Microsoft Dataverse. The Outlook one, for example, is Outlook. So if we scroll down, we can see that we've got Microsoft Dataverse. I'd select that. It prompts me to create a connection. I can use an existing connection or create a brand new connection. So that connection can be logged into any account that I tell it to log into. In this instance, we've already got them created, so we're not going to do that. So that's your connection references, and that's what you want to be associating to the flows. They'll naturally pick up when you create new flows if you create them as name connection references, and they're much easier to manage than you may enter a flow solution and you'll see loads of automatically created connection references for each individual dev that's on that team. So that just makes things a little bit messy. And obviously, if you have certain connection references that are owned by an individual, and that individual then leaves the organization, which is very common in the development space, then potentially that connection to that flow will cancel unless you share it with the owners, which we'll get onto in a small while. So if we go back to my solutions, by the way, how good's the new designer? Absolutely fantastic. Love it. Still some bits I'm getting used to, but the new Power Apps, Power Automate design is fantastic. So we'll go into our flows, environment variables, and from the off, we're going to straight up create a flow. So we're going to go into new automation, Cloudflow, and here you get the option for automated, instant, and scheduled. So from the off, just because I wanted to show something in a demo, we're going to do it as instant, so it's nice and straightforward. It prompts you to provide a name. You don't need to provide a name at this point. You can choose to skip, but for the purpose of demonstration, we will. And what we'll put in here is we'll put my first flow. Hopefully it's not my first flow, otherwise this would be a very boring and short session, but this is for the purpose of demonstration again, my first flow, and we'll select to manually trigger the flow. Here we'll create it. When you manually trigger it, you can choose to have certain input parameters. Here I want the input parameters to be full name, for an example, and then also we'll capture an email, and then what we'll do is that we'll create a record off the back of it. The record is add a new row, obviously. And what we'll see is that if I go to add a new row, I can rename this, but I'm not going to at this point in time because I want to show you how I've seen some things look in the past. So we can go contacts and we can go there and we can go last name. Oh, that's gives us a little bit of trouble because we were expecting full name, but okay, I don't want to change that process. I want to leave it as it is. And because I'm feeling pretty lazy, what I can do is that I can just change that to be full name. So the parameter that we get in from the text. We'll save it. As you can see, this doesn't help anybody, especially in the development space and for your own personal reference. I've got my first flow, but my first flow could be doing absolutely anything. I've got a manual trigger. I don't really know what's in that manual trigger unless I open it up and see what's going on. And I'm just being told that I'm adding a new row. So we could go ahead and we could test this and it would prompt us manually to put some parameters in there for full name and email. But that's not the route that we want to go down. We want to try and make this a little bit better from the off. And we're going to try and stick to some best practices throughout. So what we're going to do is that we're going to change the name of it from the off. So this my first flow is no good to anybody, as I've said. So we've got an on-demand process. We call it on-demand create contact. From the off, I understand that this is an on-demand flow, so one that's manually triggered, and I can create a contact. Also, what I like to do as a best practice is rename every single step as best as you can. So if we go through and we can just rename the steps, obviously in this instance, you're manually triggering the flow. It's not an awful lot you can do to rename that. It does what it says in the tin. You've got full name and email in there as inputs as well. But then we want to try and make this a little bit more verbose. So we're going to add a new row. I always like to leave the step name in there as well. I think that's quite a key part for anything that we do in terms of development. Just saves people time. Every single time you open it up, you've got to try and decipher what's going on, but that step automatically from the off. So obviously all these Dataverse connections, the list rows, the perform bound action, etc., they all have this kind of same banner. So if I didn't know that, I'd have to open it up and try and decipher what's going on. We'll also get into just adding some comments along the way as well and potentially adding some notes to what you can do. But in this instance, what we'll do is we'll add a new row and we'll add a contact. This just tells me that I'm adding a new row with the contact details that I've got. But obviously, I've got full name and email. I could choose to populate these in there. But as you can see, the required field for me here is last name. So they start to look how we could potentially gather a last name from a full name because I don't want to change those parameters. So we've got a lot of outputs that we can put in here. So one of the most common one is a compose. Quite often, I think people get mistaken between compose and variables and when to initialize a variable and change it throughout. Generally, I stick with a rule of thumb that if it's not going to change throughout the flow process, then use a compose. If you've got a variable that's going to change and potentially append throughout your flow, then obviously use a variable. So you can initialize that with a particular data type. But within here, it doesn't discriminate your compose. You can pretty much put anything into it. So it's kind of a good practice to do that. So let's try and get some additional details. We've got someone's full name. We're going to try and assume that they've just got 2 names in this instance. We're not going to ask them for full name. We're not going to get too complicated. We could if we really wanted to, but for the purpose of demonstration, let's not. So we can compose first name. And then also what we'll do is we'll do another compose. And we'll do last name as well. And also we'll do another compose to try and sort out this email, because what I commonly see is when you're bringing emails in is that they come in with capital letters, potentially trim spaces on the edges. So what we're going to do is just make it a little bit cleaner and clean up a little bit. So we've got the first name. How are we going to get this first name? We can write an expression. So from the off, you can see that my expression box is pretty limited. So if I just start putting some dynamic content into my expression, so I can put concat, and then we'll wrap something in there and put a piece of dynamic content to show you what it looks like. And we'll use an environment variable because at this point, there's nothing else that we can potentially do in there apart from full name email. So let's put a random one in there. And you can see that this just goes off screen. It's pretty difficult to use. So I always encourage everyone to use what's called the experimental features. They are honestly massively invaluable and you'll get so much more out of them. I know they are designed to kind of be in preview and for you not to that's in there. I've got something in there, compose in it, that's fine. So they are designed to be in preview mode and they shouldn't really be used as a kind of productionized version, but they are honestly much better. You're going to get so much more out of it if you use experimental features. So to turn that feature on, what you need to do is go to your Power Automate settings. So in your setting cogs here, go view all Power Automate settings. Mine's already on, but it's just not applied. That can quite commonly happen when you create new flows. All you need to do is just kind of save it. It'll kick me out. Now I've just got to go back in and kind of recreate what we've done. So if I go back into my flow solution, I've got the on-demand flow that I can open back up, and hopefully I've got the new experimental features available to me. So on-demand, create contact. So now you'll see when I come in and I try and compose my first name, I'll click on this box and I've got some dynamic content that I can enter, or I can enter a function straight away. How much easier is this function box? A hell of a lot easier. So much better and so much more efficient. You can kind of tab down and then kind of fit things as you want throughout. So we need to try and grab the first name here. So we're just going to do some string manipulation. So essentially, I want to grab the first part after this, or the first part before the space. So how do we do that? We just write a little expression. So we're going to grab the first, and within that, we're going to split on the space. So we're going to go first, and we've got a split function. And then what we're going to do is put some dynamic content into here. So we're going to say full name. It's going to come into us. We've got the parameters there. Then we need to define what we want it to split on. So if we go here and then put a split, and we're going to say split on the space. So it's going to grab me everything before the space, essentially. Okay, and we can remove that one because it's no longer needed. That's just for me to save the flow. And we're going to do a little bit more string manipulation. There's many ways to skin a cat in this instance. But what we're going to do is we're going to do a simple join function, and then we're going to skip so we can get the last. Again, we'll use a split, and then within the split, we'll do exactly what we done last time. So we'll have the full name in there, and we'll split again on the space. We'll tell it we're going to skip one character. And then I'm going to grab that in the join. So that's what we're going to join it by. Okay, perfect. So we've got the first name, last name. As I said, we're going to compose the email as well. So let's call it formatted email, just so you can understand that a little bit better. Remove the inputs from here. We're going to write another function. So as I said, a lot of things come in capitalized. This can be an issue when you're passing things back and forth APIs. Some things don't like capitalized emails. So generally, we always put like a TLOA in and then put a trim just to make sure there's no trailing or leading spaces on it. And then we'll just put the email in there. Perfect. So now we've got all that in there, we can save it, and then we can start to apply that kind of dynamic content to our new contact record. Okay, so if we go in here, we can exit that off. This is the thing with this experimental features. It does tend to tab off every now and again, but that's fine. It's definitely worth it. So please stick with it. We're going to go for the outputs of these composes. We're going to put the last name in there. We're going to put the email as that output, formatted email, and then the first name. Dynamic content again. We're going to go keep putting that in. We're going to put outputs of the first name. So you can see now if you hover over your functions, you've obviously got the ability to look at what you're passing it and kind of the raw parameters in there. So we've got outputs of last name, output to the formatted email, and output to the first name. Okay, so if we save that, we're going to run a little test just to verify we know what we're doing. So as you can see, we've got kind of a standardized process throughout. We've named these correctly. We've said that we're composing a first name, a last name, and a formatted email, and you know that we're adding a new row of contact. You can open it up and then see what parameters are being passed, obviously. Obviously, this is going to be a little bit slow for saving because there's quite a lot of people on the call. So instead of pressing save there, to save myself a little bit of time, what I could have done is just press test from the off, and then you can choose to save and test at the same time. So in this instance, again, it's going to be manual. So we can put some full details in there. We're going to go Alex Jones, because I don't exist as a contact in there. And then we're going to say alex.jones@power365solutions.co.uk. And then we're going to put a trailing space on there just for a laugh. Okay. So we've got that flow running. We can see it's going to compose the first name, compose the last name, format the email. It's going to create me a contact. So let's just look at that. Have a look what that does. So we've got Alex, we've got Jones, perfect, no spaces there. And then we've got a formatted email. So it's taken it to lower and it's taken the trim off there as well. That allows us now to create a new row for a contact. So we've got the email, first name, last name. It's very minimal details, but again, this is just a small demonstration. Now, if something went wrong in this flow, I generally wouldn't know. As an administrator, you might get a notification email, but they don't really help anyone because generally it's the development team or service account that's the owner of the flow. So one of the most important things that I want to try and cover today is going to be the error logging aspect, and it's something that's not really talked about enough, and it's something that you should be implementing in all your flows. So I kind of have a different process around this. You can obviously see your flow runs and your previous flow runs from 28 days prior in your all runs area. We can go back and see what we've got there. You can see some failures if they've been if they've come up, and then what you can do is also see other details. So you've got details of the flow name, status, etc., the type, it's instant. You've got the connection references. You should be able to edit them from here, but they've recently changed it, so you can't. If you need to edit the connection references, you need to look at owners, which is also very pertinent. They've added this solutions part in there, fantastic, and some process insights as well. So if we go into the owners, I'm currently the owner of this. That's not good for an organization you're developing in. You probably want it to be a production service account. So in this instance, we can add a production service account. SVC admin is our production service account. And this just basically says you're going to be giving them permissions to whatever you've set up within this flow, just so it's shared. But it doesn't mean that if I leave the organization, this service account is not going to leave the organization anytime soon. So we'll add that in there. If you do want to change the connection references easily, you can go into this area, press edit, exit the connection reference off, and then when you try and reconnect or press edit, it'll prompt you for which one you want to choose, and then you can choose the name connection reference. So actually, for purposes of demonstration, let's remove that, press edit. It's because I didn't save it in that instance, and it's not prompting me, but if we go in here, now I can choose a connection reference. By default, it's already there because I've saved it and set it up. So as soon as I press save, that'll be reconnected as a connection reference anyway. So error logging, how do we go about figuring out what errors have happened in our Power Automate flows, which is pretty essential for administrators and developers. You need to know what's going wrong, and it could well be business process error, but in the real world of flows, what we want is for everything to work perfectly. It doesn't always happen, but we'd love for things to just happen completely autonomously, have no errors, and for it to be perfect all along. That's just not the case, because some people don't fill in certain amounts of data, or you don't add enough conditions into checks to see if things are present. So you're going to have inevitable failures along your flow development journey. So it's recommended that you always create an error log. So I've got kind of two error logs, one that I use if we don't have a database, such as Dataverse or SharePoint, and one that I use if we have got a database. So I'm going to show you both, quickly show you the one that without a database, because we're going to brush over it because this is primarily around Dataverse, but it's got some good stuff that you can see in there. So we've got an error log template. This is just set around a try catch. I've obviously got a manual trigger just for purposes of demonstration. And within here, what you would have is essentially all your actions contained within a try scope. So what is a scope? A scope is just a container for your actions. You can drag things out of there at free will. You can put things in there. You can put scopes within scopes. But the most important thing with scopes is that they can be contained into one area and they can have configure run afters individually on them. What do I mean by configure run after? So what you can see here is a nice little red dotted line. That's because I've got a configure run action on this step. So this is the error login step. And what I can do is I can choose the configure run after, and I can say, let me know when this is timed out, skipped, or failed. So if I remove the success, you'll see that this red dotted line appears. Just to prove that, I'll put the success back in there, because that is the default for every single step that you add. So I'll add the success in. That's no longer red. So it's no longer a fail-safe scenario. But the beauty of doing things in a big block like the actions try and then the error login catch is that you can get a lot of details about the failure itself. So if I was to go in here and then just leave this as failed, what we can do is we can compose the error details from a scope block. So essentially what you do is you just grab the result of the actions, which is essentially your try loop. So we can grab all the things that have happened within there, and we can get the specifics around what's failed, the name of the failures, the response code, etc. So what I've done then is I've chose to pass the JSON of the result error details just so I can use it into a select as well. So I've purposely got something as a contact failure. I know it's going to fail because it's trying to update a row that doesn't exist. So let's just see how this looks in action. So we'll save and test it, and all being well, this step will fail in the try, and then it'll show me the details of the error response later on down the line. So you can do with what you want with these responses. So you can choose to directly email someone. You can store them somewhere else, which is primarily what we do with our Dataverse Flow one. But within the Dataverse, within the Dataverse log, we don't need to see all that additional information. So this probably is just a little bit too intense for what we need, because we can just create a flow run instance that'll take us straight directly to the flow run that failed. So if we've got an issue with it, we can go and diagnose it straight from the off. We don't need all the additional details like error code, etc. Another great thing about Power Automate, make sure you're in the Power Automate app. It does allow you to navigate through it with a Power Apps designer, but that's not very beneficial. You need to get into this Power Automate to kind of see the outputs and parameters. And now you can see that I've got all this information available to me because I've put the results of the scope block into a function. And we can see that I'm getting the error code, the message, start time, all really good, useful information that I would need as an administrator to potentially debug this flow. As I've said, if you can store this somewhere else, it's not really a need for it. So I'll show you that shortly as well. Then what I'm doing is I'm just passing that so I can use it and select it later on down the line. Essentially, when you're passing something, all you can do is just take a run and then grab a load of JSON from an already run flow, copy and paste it into the schema, and it will generate you a schema. So you just press generate from schema, and it'll update, and it gives you this kind of format here. And that just means that I can choose these selects later on down the line. As we can see now, I've selected the error. I only wanted certain information from that past response. I didn't want it all. So now I've got this information. As I said, you can email this to whoever you want, your list of administrators, and it will work absolutely fine. It'll kind of be on demand every single time a flow failure comes in. Or alternatively, you can write it to a database as well. The one I really want to look at today is the error log template around Dataverse. So again, I've just got some stuff in here I know it's automatically going to fail. And this is just a step that we add in at every single flow, right at the end. And it's always got the conditions of the configure run afters. I always put it as failed, skipped, and timed out, so that it'll always come down to this block regardless. So if it skips one of these steps because it's failed, it'll always get to the bottom, and it will always trigger this. So this is always going to run if something goes wrong further up the line. So what I'm doing here is I'm passing the JSON of the workflow. So the workflow is just a function you can pass it. Again, you've just generated this from a sample. I'll show you kind of how I do this in a short while, but it's pretty straightforward. Again, you can just use things in Flow however you want. If I wanted to get the workflow output straight from the off, a common thing that I will do in my Flow development is that I'll add just a compose, because as I said, composes are fantastic. They can pretty much do anything with them. I'll put a compose in, and I want to know what gets returned for the workflow. So this is only temporary. This is fine to do this within your flow process. We've got a workflow, and I want to know what I'm going to get back. But I don't really want to run the subsequent actions because I don't really know what's going to happen. So I'll just put a quick terminate in. Fantastic. That's not responding to me. Let's try this again. Hopefully the demo gods are with me. It's not enjoying that, but essentially there's another step called terminate. So let's try it one last time because I'm desperate. No, it really doesn't want it. So you can add a terminate action in there and you can choose whether it's success, cancelled or failed. So all I would do is just run that flow then and it'll just succeed straight away. That just means I can get all the outputs of the things that I need. So in that instance, I needed the workflow. I already got it, so it's pointless doing it and going through it again, actually. So I'm passing that workflow information there, and that just means that I can compose things later on down the line. So I'm showing you some different options here. So I'm composing a run URL. So this is the URL from this particular flow run. So as you can see, it's unitedkingdom.flow.microsoft.com. That's obviously dependent on your region and where you are. And then it just builds this dynamic flow up. You can do this all in one compose, or you can choose to do it with the outputs of the past workflow. So I could choose to basically do what I've done here in this massive concat. It's not massive, but it's essentially got the base URL, which never changes. It's got the environments, and it's saying grab the workflow's environment name from the tags, grab the workflow name, and then grab the workflow run name. So that essentially would just give me this URL. That's all I'm doing here is building that up. And I've concatenated it so it's all in one string. So that's a quick way of doing things. As I said, you can also build it up manually. So if I wanted to decide I wanted to build this manually with dynamic content, I could literally put that in there and then start picking some stuff off from my past flow actions. I think, what was it? Tags, name potentially. And as you can see, you'll get all the additional information that you need here. But what we've got is all wrapped in one concat action. I can share this with you later on, or I'll hold it on screen for a little bit if you want to do a little bit of a screenshot. If not, as I said, we're going to drip feed this stuff out as blogs over time as well. So then what we're doing is we're adding a new row. So I've created an organizational owned entity or table in this modern day terms. And then all I'm doing is passing it some information. So I'm just letting it know the flow name and the flow run instance. And then I'm setting the status reason to new, because it should be on there. So all I've done is just create a table in the background that just captures all this information and it sets them up into an error log. So this error log, as I said, will appear as your standard dynamics table, and then you can drill into it and find any information you want. I've set up a URL here, so it'll take me straight to the flow instance that's been failed. It'll obviously say that's been successful because it's successfully completed this step, so you may not have the failure, but anyway, it's logged in your error log. What you can choose to do then, if you remediate some actions, you can always choose to resubmit this flow run, so you can always, do the changes you need and be like, okay, we missed a little step here. Let's go back to this error log, press this link again, and press resubmit, and then that will run this flow successfully if you've done everything right, of course, which after watching this, I'm sure you will. So we've got this error log available to us, and we can utilize this to its full capabilities by notifying people on a daily basis. So this is a thing that we commonly do. So we notify administrators. This can be a support desk. This can be a service desk. I was going to try and build this flow from scratch, but I was weary of time and looking at the time. I think it's best to kind of just demo you the flow and show you the steps that I've used in it rather than building it straight from scratch, because it might take a little bit long, just so we can get the most benefit out of it. So this is the example of what I've got here. So basically, we've got a reoccurring flow. So in our mind, this is a scheduled flow. We've got it running at 9:30 every day. We've got the time zone set as my local time zone where we need it. Time zones are interesting as well. We'll get onto that quite shortly. And then what I'm doing is that I'm listing the rows of the error logs that happened in the last 24 hours. So here you've got some quite neat things you can do. There's lots of Power Automate functions we can play with. You can actually use this as an action. There's an action called get past time, but I like to put it in a variable because it's just a little bit quicker sometimes. So I'll put this in there, get past time of 1 day from the present time of running. So every single day it's going to run at the same time. It's going to get me what's happened in the past 24 hours. And then essentially I'm going to see what outputs I'm returned from the list rows. So hopefully you've all seen this, but what I'm doing is I'm checking the length of the outputs of the body value. So if I go back to a flow run, and I open up a flow run that succeeded prior to this, now that's one I've actually, so this is a perfect example. I put the get past time in there just to see what it looked like with the terminate, and I've worked with that method. So if we go here, this will show you the get past time, and this will show you the raw output. So essentially what I'm doing in the flow run, if I go back into the edit and I'll show you that function, I'm essentially saying, grab me the length of the value. So count how much is in this value. As we can see, there is 3 that have been returned. So I would have 3, and all I'm checking to see if there's more than as 0. So I'm checking the length of the results. If there's more than 0, I need to take some actions. If there's not, don't worry about it. We can forget about it until the next 24 hours. So after this, what I'm doing is I'm choosing to list rows of the model-driven app. So the reason I'm doing for this is because I want to build up a kind of dynamic URL that I can send to administrators. So within the context of building a URL parameter, if I go to my error log and actually look at this record, you can see this URL parameter here. I've got the kind of base URL, which is my environment. I've got the main.aspx, which isn't going to change. And I've got some query URL parameters. So I've got the app ID, which I'm obviously getting with this list rows. And then after that, I've got the page type entity record, which isn't going to change. An and symbol, ETN, P365 underscore error log, that's not going to change. And then I've subsequently bolted on the ID of this record, all of which the dynamic content is available to us in the flow run. So what I need to do is that I need to go back to this list model driven apps. And what I'm doing here is that I'm choosing to get the unique name of this application, because I know that's never going to change. I didn't like the concept of doing it by the kind of display name, because people can update that to go along. This is the schema name of the model-driven application. And I'm grabbing the app module ID from it, because that's what I need to pass as the parameter. So to get that information, you might be thinking, well, where am I going to find that? How do I know the unique name of my app? This is where I commonly use some test flows. So I'll create a new window and I'll click my flows. Just get rid of this presenter thing at the top. And then we'll go to my flow and we'll just do a instant cloud flow. So this doesn't appear in the context of the solution straight away because I don't want it to. I'm not going to deploy it. It's just for my benefit and test purposes. So generally, I'll just have one flow, test my flow. And this is fine to call it that because I'm just going to use and abuse this as I go through the process. And I'm going to change it every single time. So now I can just list rows. I can even be a little bit naughty because no one else is going to see this, and I don't have to stick to naming conventions. So if I go model-driven apps, you can actually grab the settings and metadata from model-driven apps. I can choose to filter it a little bit. That's the warning it's going to give me, is that you're not filtering it. It's going to return you a lot of information, but that's fine for us at the moment. We just can save, test this, and then find all the metadata we get back to us. Again, it's going to give you a warning. We can choose to manually test it. And we'll run that from the off. So now this is going to list rows of all the model-driven apps that are available in my environment, and this allows me to get the kind of unique metadata I need. As you can see, it's pulled back too much outputs to kind of show in a little pop-out display, so it's going to show me this in horrible formatted version. But if I Control F, what I can do is I can just look for the application name, the Power Hour, and I can see the kind of stuff that's associated to it. So I've got the unique name P365 underscore the Power Hour. So that's kind of what I'm looking for. I know that's what I'm looking for. You can see some other data within here. It's quite pertinent to note the kind of OData values that you're given. So as you can see here, OData ID, this is what's going to give me my base URL shortly. So look out for that because I'm going to split it on the API and grab the first of it as well. But now I know that I've got the unique name of the P365 underscore the Power Hour, then I can do subsequent actions built off that. Again, I don't need this anymore. I can just exit it off. I don't really care about that flow run anymore. Let's go back to our query. So now this is going to get me the model-driven app module ID from my application, P365, the Power Hour. And that's all going to constitute towards building this URL out. So we've got that, we're listing the rows, and then we're going to compose the environment URL. As I said previously, we grabbed this by splitting on the APIs. We're grabbing the first part that appears before the slash of the API. So we're querying and we're getting the OData context, which is essentially that URL that I just highlighted on screen, and that will give me my base URL all the time. You may argue that you can do this with an environment variable. I found recently environment variables, specifically text environment variables, are a little bit buggy and they don't tend to update. They tend to cancel every single time you do stuff. So if you can eliminate the need for that, then why not? I kind of see benefit in doing this at all times. So this will give you your base URL. We've obviously got the app module ID. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to create a HTML table, which is, again, part of these compose functions that you can do, data operations. And I'm going to say from the list rows. So as you can see, if I highlight it, where's this coming from? The list rows of the error logs in the last 24 hours. I want you to create me a header of a flow name, flow run instance, and an error log record. So the error log record is where I'm building up this dynamic URL that you need to use. So you can see I've got the outputs, which is composing the environment URL, which is essentially my base URL. As I've said, I've got the main.aspx and the query for app ID. This part's never going to change per environment, so that's fine. And then obviously I'm grabbing the first parameter for the app module ID. So this is my first parameter, and then I'm adding another parameter, page type entity record. Again, not going to change. And then we've got this P365 underscore error log. Again, not going to change. And then I've got the error log ID. So what this does, it just essentially builds me a table of all those 3 instances that we had for this error log in that 24 hours. But when you do that, you may see that it brings up some horrific formatting, and it doesn't come in a formatted method at all. It gives you a really dull HTML table. What you can do for HTML tables and kind of anything within emails is that you can add table style to it. So this is just something I quickly grabbed off the internet. You don't really need to be a master in CSS to understand this, or HTML. It's pretty straightforward. A lot of it speaks for itself. You can always play around with the colors and kind of test it at your free will if you see fit. So what I've done is I've just composed a table style URL. A little tip what you can do with actually on your emails. So you can build a nice table for yourself. You can send that email to yourself, and you can view the source code. So you can quickly go into your emails and select to view the source code of the HTML, and that'll give you the styling. And then you can subsequently use that styling throughout all your flows if you see the need. That's how you can kind of cheat and build some nice email templates, is by building a nice email, send it yourself using the source code. Probably not the best method of doing things, and we probably recommend a third-party solution for doing such things, but it's always an option. And now what I've done is I've sent an email to my admin. So this is every day at 9:30. We're going to inform the admins that we've got some errors, and it's going to list them with a nice styled, formatted email. So see if I can bring this up, because I did test this at some point, but I've had many emails since, so bear with me. Okay. So this is what it will finally look like. You know, it's nothing to shout home about, but I've said that there's been some errors. Please investigate. You can extend this to whatever you want to. In fact, the one that we use is much further extended than this, but this just gives you an example. So you've got the flow name, the flow run instance, and then essentially the error log, because what you want to do is go through and update that error log as you go in. So if I select that, you can see it literally takes me to the error log record. And then once I'm investigating this, I can change the status reason potentially to under investigation, or escalate it to the dev team. And you can pass and progress these error logs through in that means. So this is also absolutely essential, in my opinion, to get into every environment. But we will move on, because there's lots of stuff to get through, as I said. But that's your kind of error logging. As I've said, you need to bolt that on and add a configure run after to the end of every single flow run. Okay, so we've got that email notification. It's building a nice HTML table for us. So let's take a look at the app that I've quickly spun up. So what we've got here is we've got a custom page within a model-driven application, and essentially this is a fictitious scenario of an employee hub, for example. Obviously, I've made it a little bit more specific to the Power Hour, and what we can do, you can do various things in this app. You can set your Power profile if you really want to. You can update your details, which will subsequently take you through to your bookable resource record. Obviously, I've not put correct data in here, so I obviously don't live in 10 Downing Street. You can probably hear from the outside. And then you also have the ability to do various things I'm just going to show you in the flows. We've got things like update number formats, view your documents, and what we're going to start on now is get the Power contacts. So this is just to show you some additional things that you can do with Power Automate and how they can tie back in with Power Apps and kind of this custom page element. Again, probably in another session of the Power Hour if there's interest. If there is, let people know in the chat, and we'll look into it. So I can choose to get the power list. It's just going to pop me out a little window. It's going to do its thing in the background. And what it's going to do is going to generate a list of all Power Hour contacts and emails to me. As you can see, again, going down the fictitious route, these are not actually our supporters of P365 or employees. These are Peter Parker, David Beckham, Tom Hanks, etc. I wish that we could employ them just for face, but we can't. But this is what it looks like in a kind of fictitious scenario. So this is giving me all the emails. That's happened with Power Automate in the background. As you see now, it's a little bit slow. Probably don't want that. It's probably not ideal for user experience. So we can look to speed things up. So if I go to that particular flow, it's going to be there. It's not the end of the world. I can always grab it if I need to. There we go. It's this one. So this essentially just is triggered by Power Apps, and it's saying to get the ID of the triggering user, which is a parameter that I pass through the custom page. And it's listing me rows. So this is the Power Hour contacts, where the Power Hour contact equals true. Just a simple Boolean field that I've implemented on a contact to let me know if they're part of the Power Hour contacts. So what I've also got here is initializing a variable of the contact emails. I'm going to build it as an array. So essentially what I can do is I can build my own arrays at any point within Power Automate, and you can use the different data operations to manipulate those arrays. So we can choose to do a join and a union, as I'll show you in a short while. And then after that, what we're doing is we're converting a time zone. So this is a real pertinent thing to understand, especially if you're in the UK, because outside of BST, you're absolutely fine. You've got nothing to worry about. That the time comes through as it's expected to come through. But when we hit BST, you start seeing things go all over the whack, and we have people complaining sometimes, or I look at a flow and I can instantly see what they've not done is use the conversion. So there's a function for this. You can convert from UTC, but there's also actions that you can build in Unit. It's just convert time zone. And what you need to do there is just pass it a base time. So this can be anything that you get passed, because the context of Power Automate always runs in UTC. So every single thing that's dealt in Power Automate as a date timestamp will always be UTC. So at this point in time, it's an hour in the past. So I need to change that. I need to update it. So what I need to do is to put the base time in there, put the format I'd like the string to appear in, and then also the source time. So that's our UTC, and then our destination time zone, which is Dublin, Edinburgh, Lisbon, London. So that we've set that, and now that's going to come in at the correct time. If I triggered it right now, UTC now would appear at, oh, I've just seen the time. That's fantastic. It's nearly 10 to, but it'll appear at 10 to 6. So we'll try and rattle through this a little bit faster. So what we're going to do is just have a power hour apply to each loop. Essentially, what this is doing is appending an array to a variable. So every single time we grab a contact and we just add this to our array. So every single time we grab an email and go in, add to array, add to array, add to array. And we're building up a nice little set of functions that we can use. And then what I'm doing is adding a new row for power hour contract retrieval. So this is just a child entity of contacts, just so we can see how many times that contact's being retrieved from this application, because maybe we want to understand how many times people are triggering this flow. This can help us see that throughout the full process. And then also we've added a delay of 1 second in here just for purposes of demonstration. So in this instance, we've got that. Let's try and run it from a previous flow run. Again, a really useful feature of Power Automate you can use from previous flow runs. So I'll trigger that. I know that this is going to take quite a while. I'll obviously put a delay of 1 second in that apply to each. So every single time it wraps around one of these contacts, it's going to give me a second delay. So I've purposefully done that just so I can demonstrate something to you. So if we can see, this is going to go on run and run and run. Well, actually, I've got some other examples of where it's been run in a similar fashion. So I've got that 44 seconds in there. And that's kind of how long it's going to take me. I can keep refreshing this. But, oh, so it's actually gone for 13 seconds, which is pretty fast. But let's see if we can make this a little bit quicker. I've got a funny feeling that I've actually left the thing I was going to show you on, so it's not as good and it's not as impactful. I have, there it is. So concurrency control. So in your for each loops, you can execute how many times you'd like it to happen sequentially. So at every single point, this is saying that you can process 20 records at one time. So you can override this because by default it's off. So if I was to leave this off, actually I'll do another demo, save and test, just so you can see how long it takes. But if I leave that off, it's going to run in order every single time. So it's going to list me those 17 records, and it's going to do the first one, the second one, the third one, etc. And it's going to work its way through the list. And obviously with that 1 second delay, that becomes a little bit intense. So you've seen now that with concurrency control, you can choose to run those 20 records at once. So that 1 second delay is not a problem anymore. So essentially, I think there's 13 contacts actually, hence the reason it probably takes 13 seconds. But now this is going to keep applying to each. You've got to be careful with this concurrency control though, because it's got some real negatives if you are running things sequentially all at once. For example, if you're using a variable and you need to change the variable, you're going to have varied results. Also, there's just a lot of considerations that you need to take. And also, if you need to run things sequentially and you need things to run in a particular order, don't enable concurrency control. You'll actually see a warning every now and again where it says to you, this for each loop should have concurrency control turned on with a degree of parallelism of 1. So you'll get some errors now and again. But if you've got a lot of things running your flow and apply to each within an apply to each, it's really useful and it can really speed things up, and processing times cut pretty much in half quite a lot for some of the flows that I've used. And then after that, we've just got an example of what we can do with these arrays. So I've counted emails in this instance because I've purposely created some duplicate contacts. So I've got a count of emails, and I've got contact emails that are based in there, so I can just see how many values I'm getting back. But I only want to get the unique values from my array, so I don't want these values to appear again. So that's simple. You can choose to have a union function, and then I can choose the length of union, and then choose to join the emails by a particular piece of string. So that just sounds like a lot of words. If you don't really understand any of it, that's absolutely fine. We can click in and I'll show you exactly what it does. So we're counting the emails. In this instance, we've got 17, and then we're composing the emails so we can see what they are. As you can see, we've got some duplicates within there, and then we're using a union to then cut out the duplicates and only get unique values. And then we're composing the length of the union. So you can see that this is essentially saved me 3 contacts. So if I'm going to use this for a mailing list, etc., I don't want a repeat of that information. So I've got that there as 14. And then what I'm doing is I'm just joining them quite simply with a piece of string, and that piece of string is a semicolon, just so I can copy and paste them directly into an email body. And as we've got everything, we've got some error login saved at the end as well. Okay, so in the interest of time, I am going to try and rattle through a few more things. It's unfortunate because I've built a nice little snazzy app which you can see things on. But the next tip we're going to go through is running things in bulk with Power Automate. So this is a common feature that I use, and that's utilizing real-time workflows in tandem with Power Automate flows as well, because a lot of things obviously you can't do with real-time workflows that need to be passed off the flow. But with flows that happen on a schedule basis, you can't subsequently trigger them on demand for any data migration purposes. So if we deploy upstream and there's loads of remediation that we need to do, you can't really apply an on-demand feature. So what I've done here is I've got this new grid, new Power Apps grid. Again, it looks quite nice. You've got the option set colors in there that you can define in your make.powerapps. Go check that out if you want. You need to do it in the classic designer, unfortunately, which is a little bit ironic. So if we open this record, you can see that I've created a custom button. Again, this is no code. This is with the help of Scott Duro. Shout out Scott Duro for creating a smart button solution. So I put a smart button solution in there and created an on-demand real-time workflow. So let's put those side by side, just so I know where I am. And this is an on-demand workflow that also runs on Create. And all it simply does is update a trigger field. So this trigger field is a date time value on the form. This doesn't need to be on the form because it's running in the context of a real-time workflow. But if you're running in the context of the new button designer, it does need to be on the form. I've not used the new button designer because it's inherently buggy for me at the moment. I seem to have a lot of problems with it. It's a bit temperamental and doesn't work. So I see this as a perfect method for doing things. But this essentially just runs a workflow. I can show you quickly what that looks like in Ribbon Workbench. Obviously, you can have Ribbon Workbench installed as a solution. All I've done is select Run Workflow, dragged it there, and I've created a custom button. Set mobile formatting. I can take a look at all the features that get dragged in here. This is all automatic. It's automatically done for you. And it's based off the workflow name as well. So it's pretty straightforward to configure. I've not used Run Webhook, which you can do to trigger a Power Automate flow, because when you deploy webhooks upstream, they change the environment URL. It gets a little bit messy, and you can't really do it as easily on demand as you can with this real-time workflow. So what you can do when you've got a real-time workflow in place is use another XRM toolbox tool called Bulk Workflow Execution. And you can choose to run things in bulk, and you can choose to batch them and put an interval delay on them as well. So in this instance, I want to reformat the numbers of all my Power Hour contacts, because let's say I've got them from an API and it's really messy. They've come in all shapes and sizes. And you can see that if I go back, I've got the mobile phone, which is some of these. We've got some with spaces in there. You've got some that are just not valid and just don't work at all. So we don't want that. Essentially, say I'm going to use BT SMS integration and I need to have them in a certain format with a dialing code in front of them, then I need to reformat them. So I've got this now that's running on demand and also running on Create as well. So I can choose to do this as like a bulk workflow job after the fact, which is what I do for quite a lot of my flows. It doesn't have to be a custom button. Essentially, I've just got a date field and I'm updating it to the modified on property of whenever I trigger the workflow. And like I said, you can come into this bulk workflow execution tool. You can choose P365 Power Hour contacts. Actually, it's which one is it? Yeah, Power Hour contacts. And then we can validate the query, and we've got 17 records that this is going to run on, and then we can just start the workflow. So this will go off and just start 17 workflows all in tandem. Each individual flow run will be separate, and it says it started 17 and I've got 0 errors. So again, that's just a simple flow that I've created for number formatting. And it's saying that when this mobile format flow is triggered, so this is my date field that I've got, and I've only got it updating every single time I run that workflow, so the real-time workflow. And I'm saying when the mobile phone is not equal to null, then start triggering. So I'm composing it to remove the spaces initially. So I'm replacing any spaces with just nothing, as you can see there with a simple replace function. And then I've just got some easy conditions in here that's saying if the length is equal to 11 and it starts with 07 and it's true, that's primarily a valid number. Then also use another action that's quite useful, which is format number. And you can choose a custom format here. So I'm saying to use +44 and then the 10 digits subsequently after there. And then I can pass that back to my contact after I've obviously got the substring of it, because I need to grab those figures and remove the first 0 because it's +44 is the dialing code. And then I pass that back as the mobile phone. So that's updated. If it doesn't meet that condition, but it's got 44 in it and it's equals to 13, bearing in mind that I've stripped all the spaces out, you can't see it, and it starts with +44 is true, that's also valid. And I'm just going to put that value back in there from the outputs of this remove spaces. If not, I'm going to say not valid and pass it to its original value. So I can go back to my contacts, I can refresh it, and you've got loads of reformatted numbers. These in this instance are not valid. That's not worked because I've run it a bit too many times. But now with this editable subgrid, you can just have that in there and just remove these values. So now we know what's valid and not valid. So this is just a quick example of how you can do things and remediate it if you need to do data migration upstream in your production environment. I can see that we're really running tight on time here. So one last point that I'd like to get through is go back to our Power Hour application. Essentially, I've got this fictitious scenario of an employee hub, and I want to view documents specific to that employee. So I've got some SharePoint integration that's set up particular to the user record. So this user record is controlled by security and the security roles that we implement. Obviously, you can only go down to business unit for user. So we control the permissions with SharePoint security. So the users who are not part of this user record can't see it. Again, that's all done within a flow. The best practices I wanted to show you here is that I've commented and added notes throughout this flow. So this essentially says when a user document location is added, which again I've done as a real-time workflow because I can do it on demand and in bulk, and I can run it against records. So this means that the user doesn't have to navigate to the Documents tab in order for that document location record to create. I'm creating it with the relevant relative URL and parent URL that I want. This has got a trigger condition on it, which my comment does state. So this is because I've got it running on a particular type. So a trigger condition is something that you can implement, and it's quite common for SharePoint scenarios. But this essentially just says when the regarding object ID type is a system user, run this flow. Otherwise, don't run it, because obviously document location can have a regarding of multiple tables or whatever when it's configured to run. So we know that this is always going to be on a system user. And again, throughout the flow, what I've done is I've added some notes to it. So, you know, I'm getting the user record of the trigger record, the fields retrieved are first name, last name, domain name. Then I'm running some HTTP requests just to get some metadata from the existing folder. I'm breaking the folder permissions as well. So I'm breaking the inheritance between the folder and the parent document library. So that enables us to then add this particular user, because I'm getting the user ID. It allows us to add these at a later date with a certain permission set. So I'm not going to dive too much into this. And this just screams to me that we also need another Power Hour Power Automate session. So I can run through some more advanced concepts next time potentially. But that kind of kindly brings us into 6 o'clock. One more thing. Tom, have I got time for one more thing, do you think? If people haven't fallen asleep by now?
Always time.
Always time. Okay. So within any of your kind of HTTP requests or within any Dataverse request, you have the ability to configure certain settings, secure inputs. Don't worry about those. Asynchronous patterns, again, for a later session, we can talk about them. But you can put a timeout policy in there and also a retry policy. So this is quite key. You can put your timeout in there. It needs to be in a certain format. So take a look at those formats. If you see that's got the specific duration in ISO 8601 format. Essentially, it's giving you an example there. So you can say P1, and you can put this out in 1 day if you wanted to. So you can put P1D, so that's 1 day. And then also you've got a retry policy in here. So by default, it might just keep running in a loop for certain HTTP requests. You might want to set this to none if you want it to be successful first time every time. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck in a 50 minute flow that should have just stopped within the first few minutes. And I think we can draw it to a quick close there. Unfortunately, there's some things that I didn't get to show you, but if you're all keen, we'll do another Power Automate Power Hour session.
Alex, thank you for your time today.
You're welcome.
You have no doubt, even myself, have managed to teach me something that I did not know before. Really, really good effort. Thank you everyone for joining. The recording we made available after, it'll be shared through email. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to follow up with our marketing team. Otherwise, we'll see you all on the next one.
Thanks all.